Welcome to Fluxedo Junction. I'm Scott Kukler. Each episode we bring you the best music of all genres from throughout the world, and this week we'll be speaking with Jock Bartley, who co-founded the band Firefall along with Rick Roberts back in 1974 in Boulder, Colorado. The band's biggest hit single, You Are the Woman, peaked at number 9 on the Billboard Hot 100 in 1976, but they also had other hits including Just Remember I Love You, Strange Way, Cinderella, and Headed for a Fall in 1980, and Staying With It in 1981. Prior to his time with Firefall, Jock had been Tommy Bolin's replacement in Zephyr, and continues to this day with a new version of Firefall, and will be playing at the Bolton Center in Bayshore, New York this weekend, with a bunch of other dates coming up throughout the country. The band also has a new single out called Part of the Plan, and that's where we're going to start things. Here's Firefall on Fluxedo Junction.
Starting to crumble. The meetings get lost and the teachings get tossed, and you don't know what you're gonna do next. You wait for the sun, but it never quite comes. Some kind of message comes through to you. Some kind of message comes through, and it says to you, love when you can, cry when you have to, feel you must, that's a part of the plan. Await your arrival with simple survival, and one day we'll all understand. One day we'll all understand. One day we'll all understand. I had a woman who gave me her soul, but I wasn't ready to take it. Her heart was so fragile and heavy to hold, and I was afraid I might break it. Your conscience awakes and you see your mistakes, and you wish someone would buy your confession. The days miss the mark and the night gets so dark. Some kind of message comes through to you. Some kind of message shoots through, and it says to you, love when you can, cry when you have to, feel you must, that's the part of the plan. Await your arrival with simple survival, and one day we'll all understand. One day we'll all understand. One day we'll all understand.
Thank you for taking the time to speak with me. I know how busy you must be, and I mean, you're playing at the Bolton Center this Friday, May 10th. That's here in Bayshore, but you've also got.
Firefall, baby. Yep.
You've all
playing the Bolton Center.
That's right. That's right. Now you've also got a new single off of the most recent album, and it's a Dan Fogelberg track. Is that correct?
That's true, and you know, it's interesting this is the first album, Friends and Family, that Firefall has made in 30, 40 years that has other people's songs on it. And the concept behind this album my manager talked to me about 2 years ago and said, you know, the original Firefall guys played in a lot of other famous bands back in the day, like the Byrds and the Flying Burrito Brothers, and
Yes, sir.
and JoJo Gunn and Dan Fogelberg, and you know, and why don't you guys do an album of just those bands' songs? And I went, wow, that's a great idea. But let's expand that. And in 1976, when our first album came out and got so much airplay right out of the box and went gold, you know, within 2 months, I said we got to be friends with on tour bands like Fleetwood Mac, the Doobie Brothers, Leonard Skinner, Marshall Tucker, Loggins and Messina. Let's add a song by those guys too. And the manager said, that's great. So the concept is bands that we toured with or were actually in, some of the original Firefall guys like Michael Clark from the Byrds or Mark Andes from Spirit, both of which are no longer in the band. You know, it's music of the 70s that we very respectfully and lovingly tried to recreate, because there's a lot of people nowadays listening to music that love 70s music but don't know some of these songs or bands. So it was an honor to do it.
Now, that's quite a responsibility to take on, to sort of represent that legacy. I guess you were already representing that legacy just by nature of who you are and your history, but to actually...
You're right, though. There's a huge responsibility with that. And for instance, you know, when our manager heard that Firefall toured with the band, Levon Helm and Robbie Robertson and all of those boys, who were one of the greatest American bands ever.
Yeah.
You know, when we toured with them, you know, our manager said, oh, that's great, you can do Up on Cripple Creek. And I went, no friggin' way. I said, that song should only be sung by Levon Helm.
Yeah.
And same with when we were trying to pick a hard song to play, somebody said, hey, let's do Barracuda. And I went, no. That's the Wilson sisters, baby. So it was a difficult choice at times. And the song that now our record label has put out as the newest single, Dan Fogelberg's Part of the Plan, that was a pretty easy choice. And I knew Dan pretty well in Boulder back in the day. And as producer of this record, I have to say that it was interesting because there were songs and guitar solos that I wanted to really keep kind of like they were. And so we kept Part of the Plan really like Fogelberg had his version. And when it came time for me to do the guitar solo on that, I realized that that was one of the solos that I wanted to learn and duplicate pretty much what Dan played, because that's the perfect solo for that song. You know, and then other songs, of course, we kind of went outside the box, and I would just play solos on, you know, on a different song. But there was 3 or 4 songs, including Part of the Plan, that we kept pretty much right down the center of the road.
No, I'm glad you brought this up. You moved exactly in the direction I was hoping to go with this conversation. I wanted to speak a little bit about your musicianship, because the diversity of the music that is on this new album, and not just that, but the diversity of the music that you've played throughout your whole career. This is not simple music. It may be music that's accessible in terms of listening, but this is not easy stuff to play. I mean, you guys are, and have always been, like musicians in a way, and songwriters. You know what I'm saying? Like, it's not like you just, you know, we're some garage band trio picking up your instruments and figuring it out as you went along. I mean, the pedigree of the members of the band reflects the actual remarkable musicianship. How do you...
Thank you for saying that, and you know, that's the truth. You know, we've got really good singers and musicians in Firefall now, and it was an honor to very carefully select each song that was on that, and then do our best to do a good version of it. So I think that this Friends and Family Firefall album is really unique, and we're really happy about it.
How does it feel to be, I mean, you're right back, not that you ever really left, but you're right back in the middle of it, new album, new single, tour, you're out there doing it, you're out there doing it on a level that a lot of people only ever get to dream about. I guess it's a two-part question.
That's I personally, as a lead guitar player, singer-songwriter, am very lucky, and all those great songs of Firefalls that we recorded on past Firefall albums, the original band and the original singer-songwriters, Rick Roberts and Larry Burnett, wrote all the great songs, and the rest of the band, myself, Mark Andes on bass, Michael Clark from the Byrds on drums, the late, great David Muse on sax and keyboard and flute, we did our best to make those songs really come to life. And I have to tell you a quick little story. When Rick Roberts, I was on tour with Graham Parsons and Emmylou Harris in the Fallen Angels when I met Rick Roberts, and of course Rick Roberts replaced Graham Parsons in the Flying Breeder Brothers.
Yes.
And in fact, it was Rick Roberts and Chris Hillman from the Breeder Brothers who discovered Emmylou Harris, who became Graham Partner's singing partner.
Yeah.
I met Rick in New York City when we played at Max's Kansas City back in whenever that was, 74 or whatever, and we figured out we both lived in Boulder. When Rick and I got together in Boulder to start jamming on what we thought was going to be Rick Roberts' third solo album, I was going to be his lead guitar player. And then Mark Andes from the band Spirit and JoJo Gunn, who had moved to the mountains above Boulder, Colorado, when he started jamming with us, it felt like a band and not a solo album. And Rick says, I know this guy Larry Burnett in Washington, D.C., who sings and writes great. You want to hear a song? And the first song we heard of Larry's was Cinderella, and we went, oh, my God, get him out here. And the end of this story is that when Larry came out, this was about a month or two before we got Michael Clark on drums, but that first week of practice, we didn't have a name of the band yet, we didn't have a gig yet, but we had 25 original songs to choose from of Rick and Larry's to see what we wanted to sound like. And, that's unheard of, 20 or 25 songs, to start a band with. That was great. And the cool thing is a lot of those songs that we worked out that first week in rehearsal before we even had a name ended up being so good, they became on the record a year and a half later, our first album in 1976. So Firefall's always been about songs first and foremost.
Oh, yeah. Well, no, on that topic, I would love to get your thoughts on what the challenges are of translating what you've always done in the studio to the live stage, because again, this is not simple music, and it requires a preciseness and an elegance, I think, if that's the right word, that a lot of ham-fisted rock bands. I mean, let's face it, you've been doing this a long time, so have I. There's a lot of guys out there who, are just barely pulling it off. You know what I'm saying? Musically, I mean,
right.
musically.
And don't have very much finesse.
Yeah.
Or, really. And the thing is, as a lead guitar player, every song that I learn and I'm going to play either on stage or in the studio, I give myself up to playing the best thing I can play to make that song better. And
right.
It's not about me showing off or, hey, how about this lick? Isn't this great? It's about really enhancing and making the song better. And we had a whole band doing that. And, and on top of those wonderful songs that I just mentioned back in the early days, Firefall was pretty much a fated kind of success story, because to have that many great songs and then a band that sounds unique and a bunch of pros. I mean, our rhythm section back in the 70s was Michael Clark from the Byrds. How many hits did they have?
Yeah.
And Mark Andes from Spirit and JoJo Gunn. It was a joy to play on those songs in the studio.
What are some of your personal musical inspirations? Who was it that got you interested in being a musician in the first place?
Well, I was born and raised in Kansas. My mom was a musician, and she had me take piano lessons when I was like 6 or 8 or something, and it didn't hit me. We moved to Colorado Springs area, to Colorado, which was really great, and I remember seeing in the Sears catalog a $59 red guitar, with an amp built into the case, and I went, Mom, I want that guitar for Christmas. Come on, $59.
Mm-hmm.
And my mom was a musician, so she knew that probably wasn't a very good instrument,
Right.
And so she did some checking around, and lo and behold, into Colorado Springs, Colorado, had just moved the world-famous jazz guitar player Johnny Smith, who played with Bing Crosby and Stan Getz and all these great players, and he opened a music store right when we moved into the area, and my mom ended up going down and talking to him, as though I was only 9 years old, and Johnny Smith said, I don't usually take students this early, but yeah, sure. So my teacher was a world-famous jazz guitar player, and he had his own Gibson signature Johnny Smith model guitar. So every guitar that I owned, early on, was a Gibson, one of the best guitars made.
Sure.
Not some fly-by-night kind of guitar that hardly played.
Right.
So I was a student of Johnny Smith, and he was teaching me, he wanted me to become the little next jazz prodigy, and everything went fine until February 9th, 1964, and the Beatles, were on Ed Sullivan's show, and from that moment on, I went, nope, I want to be a rock and roll guitar player.
Think about that for a second, though. I mean, I'm sure that you have. That one event, that appearance of the Beatles on the Ed Sullivan Show influenced so many different genres of music. I mean, I'm hearing you say it. I've heard heavy metal guys say it. I've heard punk guys say it. I've heard country guys say it. That one event is what got them into it, what turned them onto it. I mean, what a footprint to leave, I mean, it's just amazing. And they did it on the strength of the songs like you guys did.
Right. And what's interesting, too, is that, the Beatles and then the whole British invasion with the Rolling Stones and the Animals and the Hollies and the Kinks and, and then the Young Rascals from, United States, that music of the late 60s, was great. And looking back at it now, the music of the 70s, we all learned that from the Beatles that you could write your own songs, right? That's a new concept. And in the 1970s, that's a decade of amazing music that will never be duplicated again.
No.
And the main reason was, all those bands of the 70s that started writing their own songs, record labels, and ours was Atlantic Records, record labels, if you had songs that the label liked and they thought, wow, we could make this a hit, they'd put your album out and they'd push it. And, along came the 80s, and pretty soon the record labels were saying, we don't like that song. We think your sound should change a little bit. We want you to use this producer. And they came really much more iron-fisted about making records. But back in the 70s, there will never be another decade like that that produced the Eagles and Dan Fogelberg and Little River Band and Firefall and all that great music from the 70s.
Oh, sure. Well, I mean, a lot of that has got to be due to the types of record executives that you had at the time. I mean, one of my favorite books is a book called Mansion on the Hill by Fred Goodman, and it's all about the birth of the modern music industry in like the early 60s from the folk movement where Albert Grossman got his start.
Right.
And then, that evolves into socially conscious rock music, and then more adventurous rock music, and then you get, along with Albert Grossman, you get people like David Geffen coming in, and the whole late 60s, early 70s California thing, the country rock thing, and the singer-songwriter thing all kind of happening at the same time. But you wouldn't have had, the only reason that works, and I think it was Frank Zappa who said this, the reason that works is because before you had David Geffen and all these younger cats, the industry was run by, older guys who were like contemporaries of Frank Sinatra's, who really didn't know what was going to work or what wasn't going to work. So they signed pretty much everything because they didn't want to miss out. And they would give bands a chance. And they would give bands a chance. It wasn't like your first album comes out, if it's a flop, you're done, the way it is now. I mean, this is pre-SoundScan, of course. So, it wasn't an exact science yet. But in that fire, the fire of it not being an exact science, you get this wonderful renaissance of all these different types of music that are still influencing us today.
Unbelievable. And, two of my favorite bands from the 70s are Steely Dan, who is totally jazzed out and not easy, simple rock and roll three-chord stuff.
Yeah.
And Little Feat, Lowell George and Little Feat. And then, you think about all the great bands of the 70s where, record labels would let you do what you did. And not try to change things or get in and tinker with the creative process. And that's one of the main reasons why there will never be another 1970s in terms of the wide variety of fantastic music. And frankly, I'm humbled and honored to have Firefall play a small role in the 70s.
Oh, I would say it was more than just a small role, and it wasn't just music either. I mean, obviously the same sort of thing was happening in the film world, and the same sort of thing was happening in the theater world and in the art world. I mean, you can point to similar movements in all of those areas. We really, you and your contemporaries really were responsible for a mini renaissance, the likes of which we're not going to see again for like probably another 100 years, I think.
Absolutely. And, that's a shame, but you know what? It was just so great then, and, it was just fantastic. And Firefall started with Rick Roberts and Larry Burnett, our songwriters, who, when we first got together, before we had a name of the band or any gigs, we had 25 original songs to work out of theirs, and it was pretty fated that we would make really good albums, at least for the first few albums.
Well, could you tell us a little bit about what's on the horizon once the tour wraps up? I know that's still a ways to go, and I'm really looking forward to the show on Friday night. I'll definitely be there. But
make sure you come up and say hi. And
will do.
It was really great to very selectively choose the songs from a Heart or the Doobie Brothers or Loggins and Messina, and as producer, I wanted to keep it right down the center of the road, although some of the songs we did really kind of differently than the original. So it was really great, and I just wanted to honor that music of the 70s because, I mean, hey, our crowd, when you go to a show of Firefalls, like at the Bolton Center on May 10th this Friday, our crowd is 50, 60, 70 years old, but we have a lot of 20 or 30-year-olds in the crowd because their parents listen to all that great music of the 70s, and they know all the words to the songs, too.
Yeah, well, I think that this idea that the music is generational. I mean, of course it is, but it's generational in a broader sense than I think most people realize. Everybody always thinks of it in terms of, it's the music that I grew up with, and that's the music that I still listen to. But people forget that that music is also passed on to the children of that generation too. You know what I mean? Like I'm about to be 55, and I grew up.
You young guy, you.
Yeah, well, I grew up on your music, and I grew up on a lot of other music that in a traditional sense would be considered the music of a previous generation. But it's my generation too. You know, my generation grew up. Maybe we were preteens when we were growing up with it, but we literally grew up with it. You know.
You literally grew up with it. And you know what? That's so cool looking back on it because, when we do meet and greets after our show, we're signing autographs and taking pictures and talking to people, it's amazing how many either couples or a guy or a gal will say, you guys were the soundtrack of my life when I was in college or in high school, and, it's just great, and these songs take me back, and music is one of the most powerful things going, and the music of the 70s, I mean, that's why there's so many classic rock stations, radio stations around the country that are top-notch radio stations getting a lot of listeners, because the music you guys are playing from the 60s or 70s was some of the best music ever made.
Absolutely, and I'm always reminded of a John Lennon quote, actually, on this topic. He was being interviewed, I think, by Rolling Stone magazine in the early 70s, right after the Beatles breakup, and they were asking him what kind of music he was listening to, and his answer, of course, was the Everly Brothers and Elvis and Little Richard and all this stuff, and the interviewer said, "Are you listening to anything contemporary?" And John Lennon's response was, "What, are those people dead?" Like those people are contemporary. Anyone who's still alive and putting music out and making it is contemporary.
It's interesting that you mentioned through John Lennon the Everly Brothers, because so many bands, particularly in England, they listen to that Everly Brothers blend, the two brothers, Don and Phil, which their vocal blend was magical. And everybody in England and a lot of bands in America wanted to emulate that singing style, and the Everly Brothers were pretty much it in the late 50s, man, I'll tell you.
Oh, yeah. Well, listen, the new album, of course, is called Friends and Family, and the new single is part of the plan. Firefall is going to be performing at the Bolton Center in Bayshore on Friday night, May 10th. I'm going to be there. I know a lot of my listeners are going to be there, too. And I want to thank you so much for your time. I'm a really big fan. I'm really looking forward to the show, and I very much appreciate you talking with us today.
Hey, well, thank you very much for having me, and we'll see you on Friday, May 10th at the Bolton Center. Yay!
Sounds great, man.
You are the woman that I've always dreamed of. I knew it from the start. I saw your face, and that's the last I've seen of my heart. It's not so much the things you say to me, it's not the things you do, it's how I feel each time you're close to me that keeps me close to you. Whoa, you are the woman that I've always dreamed of. I knew it from the start. I saw your face, and that's the last I've seen of my heart. It's not so much a pretty face I see, it's not the clothes from the start. I saw your face and that's the last I've seen of my heart.